Today in English Language Arts, we are going to be reading Extended Read 2 and our final reading in our unit on Earth changes. Now, what we're reading today is an actual eyewitness account of the explosion of Mount Vesuvius, a famous volcano in Naples, Italy. And this, of course, happened a long time ago. It happened in 79 current era, so that was 1,900 years ago. And this is a letter from Pliny the Younger. And remember that we learned earlier that because of his letter, volcanoes that explode very violently have his name, and they're called Plinian volcanoes. So I'm going to get us started, and we are on page 22 again by reading this brief read, which is actually before. This is kind of a summary of what happens during that explosion, and then we're going to read actually what Pliny wrote. On August 24th, 79 CE, one of the most powerful volcanoes in the world, called Mount Vesuvius, erupted in southern Italy. Spewing molten ash and rock into the air, it destroyed the city of Pompeii and two other resort towns nearby. People suffocated from the ash and gas that came forth from the eruption. Then volcanic debris literally buried Pompeii and the surrounding area. The cities were forgotten and stayed buried for almost 1,700 years. Excavations began in 1748 and continue today. Amazingly, because the area was buried so quickly by volcanic ash, everything and everyone was well preserved. So an excavation, that's going to be a scientific term that means to cut out or carve out. So because so many layers of ash and dirt over the years were on top of the towns and the people, they had to dig it out and excavate the area. A voice from ancient Pompeii reaches us through his written account of the Mount Vesuvius eruption. This writer is named Pliny the Younger, and his letters provide an eyewitness account of the last hours of a Roman city. During the eruption, he was staying in the home of his uncle, Pliny the Elder. The elder Pliny was a renowned scholar and an official in the Roman court and navy. So renowned means well-known, or famous actually too, well-known. And a scholar is going to be an intellectual, so a thinker, an important person. So this excerpt is a translation of the Latin text. So originally it was written in Latin and had to be translated so that we could hear Pliny's words today. Now, I feel that it would be important to note or to think about, what do we actually learn from eyewitness accounts? And in this situation, I mean, this happened so long ago, what value does knowing his words and what he saw give us today? So be thinking of that as we're reading. And today, this is part one of a two parts for this story because it's so long. And I'm going to begin now on page 24. To Cornelius Tacitus, that letter I wrote to you concerning the death of my uncle has raised your curiosity, it seems. Therefore, I will relay the terrors and dangers. My uncle, having left us, I spent such time as was left on my studies until it was time for my bath. Afterwards, I went to supper and then fell into a short and uneasy sleep. For many days, we had noticed a trembling of the earth. Now, this is important because basically from everything that we've studied that prior to massive volcanic eruptions, there are small little earthquakes all around. So the sleeping giant, Mount Vesuvius, had woken up and was letting everyone know what was about to come. This did not alarm us, as this is quite an ordinary occurrence in Campania. So this was regularly happening, and people kind of had turned off their worry, I guess you could say, because it happens so often. But the quivering earth was especially violent that night. It not only shook, but also overturned everything around us. My mother rushed into my bedroom, where she found me rising to awaken her. We sat down on the open area of the house, in a small space between the buildings and the sea. As I was only 18 years of age, I don't know whether I should call my behavior in this dangerous time courage or folly. And folly means a silliness. But I took up my book and amused myself with reading and even making notes as if I had been perfectly at my leisure, meaning leisure would be at rest. So one thing we know from what we've read so far in Pliny's account is that there had been many tremors in the region for a very long time prior to this really, really big explosion. So small earthquakes had occurred for a long time prior to explosion. And one thing that I found kind of funny is where he's saying he didn't know if he was being courageous or silly because he decides to read in the middle of this violent earthquake. And I think that I told you guys in class that I was actually in a tornado when I was in high school, and the tornado went right over our high school building. And we were taking an algebra test, and the alarm came on for tornado alert for us to get into the hallway of the school and get down and cover our heads. And I feel that, I don't know if it was my courage or my folly, but I remember asking my teacher if I could take my test into the hall and finish it. So again, I guess similar to this, we'd had tornado drills before, so I knew what to do. I wasn't overly scared, but I don't know if that was me trying to control the situation by continuing to take my test, but I can very much so relate with Pliny here and what he just said. So number 3, just then a Spanish friend of my uncle's joined us. Observing me sitting by my mother with a book in my hand, he scolded her for her calmness and me for my careless security. So to scold someone is to verbally reprimand or punish. So it's like a verbal punishment, reprimand. Sorry about that spelling right there, verbal reprimand. Nevertheless, I went on with my book. Though it was now morning, the light was still dim. The buildings all around us tottered. So the buildings are still kind of shaking because of that violent shake that had happened earlier. Though we stood upon open ground, there was no remaining ground that was not in danger. We therefore decided to leave our town. So they make the choice after the violent earthquake in the evening, and then they slept kind of through the night. They decide to leave the town. Number 4. A panic-stricken crowd followed us. Because a mind distracted with terror doubts its own decisions, they pressed behind us. We then stood still in front of a most dangerous and dreadful scene. The chariots rocked backwards and forwards, even though they were upon level ground. We could not keep them steady. Even by supporting them with large stones, the sea seemed to roll back upon itself. I am certain that the beach was considerably larger. Several sea animals were left stranded upon it. Above a black and dreadful cloud, broken with rapid zigzag flashes, revealed behind its variously shaped masses of flame. The bigger flames were like sheet lightning, but much larger. Upon this, our Spanish friend addressed himself to my mother and me with great energy and urgency. So as they're leaving, they're watching very few things that are left on the land in front of them. They're shaking violently now. So this would have been that last probably big earthquake prior to the eruption. And then I love how the author adds that the sea seemed to roll back on itself here. So we get a sense that the ocean is even violently being shook by this earthquake. And then he says that sea animals were left stranded upon the beach that seemed larger. So a mass amount of waters kind of moved away from the shore because all of the rocking has displaced a lot of things. And then this picture here, we're going to read this caption. In the 19th century, archaeologists discovered the bodies of those who had died in Pompeii when Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 CE. Their bodies had been preserved by volcanic ash in exactly the positions they had been in at the time. Archaeologists made plaster casts out of those remains, which are on display in Pompeii today. And I've actually been to Pompeii and see many of these casts that were made of the originals. They're pretty impressive too. And our last page for today is going to be page 26. I believe that is correct. Yes. And here's some more ruins of a bakery in Pompeii and the building and some of these larger urns. These may have been used to hook animals up to. I don't remember exactly what those were used for. So we're on page 26. If your brother, he said, if your uncle is safe, he certainly wishes you to be safe too. But if he died, I'm sure it was his desire that you both survive. Why, therefore, are you delay in your escape of a moment? So the Spanish friend is asking them, why aren't they leaving? Why are you delaying? Why are you pausing? So delay, they're pausing and not really acting with a sense of urgency in this situation. Good thing they had this Spanish friend. We said we could never think of our own safety while we were uncertain of his. Upon this, our friend left us and quite speedily fled from the danger. Soon afterwards, the cloud began to lower and cover the sea. It had already hidden the island of Capri and the promontory of Mycenium. My mother now begged, urged, and even commanded me to make my escape. Because I was young, I could easily do that. As for herself, she said her age and weight made the journey impossible. However, she said she would willingly meet death as long as she did not cause mine. But I absolutely refused to leave her. I took her by the hand and forced her to go with me. She agreed reluctantly, but not without many instances of her scolding herself for slowing my flight. So kind of reluctantly means she went, but she didn't really want to go fully, so she could have hesitated. It was kind of against her will. So when we do something reluctantly, we're not 100% engaged, and she's upset with herself for slowing her son down. Now I'm going to continue reading the other pages that are left, just so that this can be one video, but you can pause here if this is the first day you're doing work. The ashes now began to fall upon us, though at first not in great quantity. I looked back. A dense, dark mist seemed to be following us. It spread itself over the country like a cloud. Let us go up the high road, I said, while we can still see. I fear that, should we fall in the road, we will be pressed to death in the dark by the crowds that are following us. We had scarcely sat down when night came upon us. It was not like when the sky is cloudy or when there is no moon, but it was like a room when it is shut up, and all the lights put out. We heard the shrieks of women, the screams of children, and the shouts of men. Some were calling for their children, others for their parents, and others for their husbands and wives. They were trying to recognize each other by the voices that replied. One was crying about his own fate, and another that of his family. Some were wishing to die from the very fear of dying. Some were lifting their hands to the gods. This portrait of Baker Terentius Neo with his wife was found on the wall of a Pompeii house. So in the previous section that we just read, I should have made a note that he says night came, but that's not like a normal night. The ash actually blocked out the sun. It blocked out the sun. And this would be very terrifying for anyone trying to flee something, run away, and not being able to connect with their family or really even know where they're going. Okay, now we're on page 28. There were many who were convinced that there were now no gods at all. They believed that the final endless night, the end of the world, had come upon us. Among these people, there were some who magnified the real dangers with fictitious horrors. I remember some who declared that part of the Mycenium had fallen and that another was on fire. The stories were false, but some people believed them. The sky now grew rather lighter, which we imagined to be an approaching burst of flames, and in truth it was. However, the fire fell at a distance from us. Then again, we were immersed in thick darkness. A heavy shower of ashes rained upon us. From time to time, we had to stand up to shake off the ashes or be crushed by the weight of them. We would have been buried in the heap. I might boast that during all of this horror, I let out not a sigh or cry or of fear. My attitude had been grounded in that sad but mighty and comforting thought that all mankind were involved in the same destruction. I believed I was dying with the whole world. I think that that's an important part to make, or important to cue in on, and just to the fact that this was such a massive and devastating explosion that the people there really thought the whole world was going to explode. And this text feature, this picture down here at the bottom, is a piece of art that someone drew about Vesuvius's eruption. And again, and this was made in 1817, so there was no way that this artist could have actually known what the exact scene looked like, but it is an interpretation of what that may have looked like on that day. Okay, we are on our final page, page 29. At last the dreadful darkness was scattered bit by bit, like a cloud or smoke. The real day returned. Even the sun shone out, though with a pale light like when an eclipse is coming on. So an eclipse is any time either the sun blocks out the moon blocks out the sun. So there can be solar eclipses and lunar eclipses. The other eclipse is when you can see the shadow of Earth going across the moon. Every object that presented itself to our weakened eyes seemed changed. Everything was covered deep with ashes, as if by snow. We returned to Mycenium, where we cleaned up as well as we could. We endured an anxious night between hope and fear, with a much larger share of the latter. So the latter is going to be the second word that he said, and he said that he endured, so he went through the night with anxious night with hope and fear, and the latter would be the fear that he is experiencing. For the earthquake still continued, while many crazed people ran up and down, increasing everyone's agony with their terrible predictions. Even though we saw the danger, my mother and I had no thoughts of leaving this place until we received news of my uncle. Farewell, Pliny the Younger. Okay, and then here is some information about Pliny the Elder. Pliny the Elder, the uncle, died during the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. Pliny the Younger and his mother, Plinia Marcella, escaped with their lives. Several years afterward, he wrote letters to the Roman senator and historian Cornelius Tacitus about the eruption. These letters were discovered and made public in the 16th century. And we know when we say a century, like the 16th century, it's really talking about the years prior. So that'd be the 1500s to 1599 would be the 16th century. All right, I hope you guys all enjoyed reading along with that.